Welcome to Planting Pinellas, the podcast that digs deep into the heart of gardening in Pinellas County. Presented by Master Gardener volunteers of the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. I'm Charlotte Vaughn.
I'm Alan Shapiro. Whether you're a local looking to connect with your community or a visitor curious about your area's culture, conservation, and all things green, this is the place for you.
Join us as we explore the people, places, projects, and of course plants that make Pinellas a thriving hub of sustainability, innovation, and natural beauty. From gardening tips to environmental initiatives, we've got the roots of Pinellas covered. So grab your gardening gloves and let's get started.
Hi, welcome back to Planting Pinellas. Very excited to be back again and on a new episode. What we've been doing is to recap these 9 principles that we've been going through.
So we kind of start out with our favorite, with the right plant in the right place. And it's number one for a reason. Everything keeps coming back to that. And today is absolutely no exception to that. Picking the right plant in the right place makes such a big difference in the health of your garden.
Yeah, and we're going to be coming back to that time and time again in today's episode.
For sure. And then watering efficiently actually is also going to be highlighted today. Fertilizing appropriately, mulch, attracting wildlife. That was what we covered last month. And we kind of got into a little bit about the pollinator census, but we'll get back to that in just a second. Managing the wildlife that you don't want, the yard pests, but being responsible about it is our topic for today. Recycling in the garden, that's going to be our fun topic for next month, and I'm looking forward to that in October. But then managing stormwater runoff and protecting the waterfront are the last 2 that we're going to kind of wrap out the year with it. Attracting wildlife. So how did you do it attracting wildlife this month, Alan?
Well, I was very excited about the pollinator census this year. I printed out my form. I had a place in mind. I had been at the Botanical Garden on Thursday doing my work, and there's an area near the native plants garden there. It's a spotty bee balm.
Nice. That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, it was just amazing.
That's right near the extension office, isn't it?
Right near the extension office.
Awesome.
It was great. And I had a plan. I was going to sit down for 15 minutes
and then Florida hit.
And we've had so much rain.
I heard that it was record-breaking rain the weekend of the pollinator census. And it was unfortunate for a lot of people that wanted to participate.
Bad for me. I really wanted to do it. But I know that
I was fortunate that I had some time available first thing Friday morning. And so I just wanted to make sure that I got out there before it got too hot in the day. But that ended up saving me from those rainstorms. And I have 2 particular plants. I have several because I've got a whole Florida-friendly garden in my yard, in my side yard. And the 2 that are, I would say, the most active out of all of my garden plants are my fiddlewood tree and my African blue basil. And the African blue basil is a hybrid plant. You can eat it, but people say it kind of has a camphor taste. It tastes sort of like cough drops. So it's not necessarily something that we would typically use in cooking, but it's safe to eat if it's grown in a safe way. But bees love it. And honestly, I can't get over how much activity is on that plant. And I've only had that for about, I think, 15 months and just planted it late spring, early summer of last year. And the plant is probably about a 3-foot ball. And it is just constantly humming and buzzing every time that I'm around it.
It's a perennial.
It is a perennial. Okay. But basically, any time of day, it is just so full of pollinators.
So you were able.
I got out there and I set my timer for 15 minutes. And as soon as I could identify one bug and mark it down, I was looking back and finding another because they were just everywhere on that plant. And I managed to identify and tally over 250 pollinators in 15 minutes just on that one plant.
That's fantastic.
And it was just mind-boggling. I know that it's constantly being enjoyed by pollinators, but to realize how much. So if you missed out this year on the pollinator census, I would highly recommend that you find either a fiddlewood if you've got room for it, or a African blue basil plant and get them in the garden. And then by next year, they are going to be just covered in pollinators.
Well, something I'm going to think about and something I may do. so that next year I can go out to my yard. I didn't have as much in my yard as I would have loved. And so I'm looking forward to it for next year.
Absolutely. So it's kind of mid-August, mid to late August every year is the Great Southeast Pollinator Census. So if you got a chance to participate, leave it in the comments of what you observed and
Yeah,
what
we'd
your
love to
results
hear
were.
from you
We
all.
would love to hear from you.
Love to hear from you all.
So
Well,
for today,
since it kind of relates, Principle 6 is manage yard pests responsibly.
yes. And that's the whole thing about Florida-friendly landscaping is there's a lot of things that we can do in our yard, in our landscape, in our gardens that maybe it creates an outcome that's desirable, but maybe the process has negative impacts. So what we're trying to do by managing the yard pests in a responsible manner is to reduce those negative impacts, both from the pest and from the cure. So anything that we're doing in our yard has a ripple effect where if we're using highly toxic chemicals and things that are killing bugs or killing plants that we don't want, that will potentially be compounded in the bigger animals that feed on those smaller creatures and also on our groundwater and things that ultimately can end up in our own food sources.
So something that you were talking about that was interesting to me because in this principle seems to focus mainly on insects.
Sure.
I don't know, we may call them bugs, but
know.
entomologists don't like that term. It's really supposed to be insects. But if we intermix, that's fine. But you were talking about, I want to say bigger bugs or bigger pests
Right. We can
that
have
can affect your yard.
We can absolutely have larger things that would be considered a pest. And even things that are beneficial, you can have too much of a good thing. And it can be in a place where you don't want it to be. So, how do you manage those good things in a way that is not harming our environment and harming our wildlife? So, I have an example of a blueberry bush that I've mentioned before on the show that it's my first season of having actual fruit on this blueberry bush. I wanted to get to enjoy it, but I didn't want to harm wildlife in the process of protecting my blueberries. So I just made a simple cage. I got some chicken wire and I cut a tomato cage in half and I wrapped that chicken wire around the tomato cage and put the spikes down in the ground over my little blueberry bush until enough of the fruit was ripe that I went out there, I gathered what I want, and then I took the cages away and whatever fruit was left, I was happy to share with any creatures that wanted to come and get it because birds don't care about fences, but they couldn't necessarily get through the cage. Something did kind of crawl up under it at one point, but they didn't get much, and that's fine. I garden for wildlife, but I do want to get to enjoy some of that fruit myself.
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you're saying in terms of the birds coming after and still giving a benefit to the birds, but then also keeping a benefit for you, but not putting any pesticide or any insecticide or anything on the plant that could potentially harm the birds that would eat the fruit.
Yeah. And then you think about things like rabbits, even bigger things like coyotes. They can cause damage to your plant, whether they're eating it or just walking through it or dropping in it, that those are not desirable things in your garden necessarily. So having those physical barriers, having a good fence system or some netting, or even if your vegetables can be in a raised bed where the rabbits aren't able to reach it as easily, that it creates a layer of protection with no chemicals at all, that you're just creating a barricade. And some of that can be done for insects as well. I had a fruit tree that I heard was very prone to getting fruit fly damage and trying to research how do I protect my fruit tree because I didn't want to spray it. And I found these little mesh bags, and you can just tie the little mesh bag around the fruit on the tree. And it's a very fine fabric, so water and sunlight can still get through it. But those fruits, as I've been harvesting them the last few weeks, have been nearly flawless. And even the ones that have fallen, they've been protected by just a simple little piece of fabric. And so those are cultural controls, things that you can do to limit the access that the pests have to your garden. But then we're going to get into a lot more of just insects in general.
But I think that goes to, there's really three areas that are important in this principle. And it goes to the first one, which is just avoiding pest problems.
Right.
putting the barriers, like you're saying, for the bigger pests, that is an important piece of it. So if you think about that up front, then that prevents you from using any chemicals that are maybe needed. It's not something that, again, we'll get into that a little bit later. It's not something that you should not do, but you should try to reduce as much as possible. And so
Right.
avoiding the pest problems is really one of the biggest pieces of this whole principle.
And a huge way to be able to do that ties right back to principle one, that if you pick plants that are disease resistant or pest resistant, there's even, if you have a lot of deer pressure, like if you're up around Brooker Creek where there's a lot more larger wildlife and open spaces, which is a rarity in our county, but there are some zones where you're going to have deer and maybe even bear and other larger animals, that how do you manage those? That some plants are just distasteful to them, or they have a texture that maybe is bristly or fuzzy, that they don't like that texture. So putting those plants out in the areas where you know that that pest pressure is going to occur, and then sheltering with a fence or some other manner if you want to have other plants, and just protecting the plant from the pest.
It avoids the problem. So let's get deep into the insect world here. And now I'm going to get geeky.
Okay, it's your turn.
It's my turn to get geeky. So I was just curious, looking at this, how many species of insects have been identified in the world? And it's 900,000 different kinds.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of insects. But then the second question comes into mind is how many of those insects are harmful?
Not very many.
And according to University of Florida, it's less than 1% of the insects are harmful to humans or ecosystems, while the rest are beneficial. And that's another whole piece of the puzzle, or harmless.
Yeah.
So they may be pesty to you, but they're harmless in terms of what they would do to the ecosystem or to your plants. And so you asked me to do the math on that. It's decimal. I don't know. I didn't take out my calculator.
Yeah, but even then, once you think about 1% or less of that original number, how many of those even are present in our county? So when you think about that huge number of species identified, that there's such a small amount of actually harmful pests that are in our area. Now, they can still be a pest without being truly economically or environmentally harmful, because if you want to eat your tomatoes and something gets it first, then you're not going to be happy about that. So how do we deal with that becomes the next question. And the absolute resource that we want to recommend is called Integrated Pest Management. And that's something that you can find from University of Florida IFAS resources, or just a simple web search. You can find IPM, Integrated Pest Management. So let's get into what that is. So the IFAS definition of integrated pest management is a strategy that helps gardeners prevent and manage pest problems with as few chemicals as possible. IPM emphasizes smart planning, proper maintenance, and natural or low toxicity controls in ensuring plants stay healthy and resist insect infestations and disease infections. So where do we start with that? There's honestly just the right plant in the right place, making those selections.
Back to principle one.
Absolutely. Being able to maintain those plants in a healthy way integrates several of the other principles, the fertilizers and the watering, that if those things are not done appropriately, they can actually encourage pest presence, and even undesirable plants can start to spring up, weeds as we would call them, that if you're overwatering or have too much or the wrong kind of fertilizer in a space, that opportunists will come in and they will start to outcompete what you wanted to have there.
Do you mean invasive species?
Possibly. It can happen.
Well, yes, and just anywhere. I have a hibiscus along the side of my house, and I was doing some work in the hibiscus, and there was a Brazilian pepper seedling. And I'm like, really? And so, I just, I pulled it up, and knowing that it hopefully won't be there, but that's this kind of thing that can happen.
Yeah, and knowing what you're looking at, understanding what plant you're actually seeing. And if you just said, oh, well, that's a cute little plant, I wonder what that'll do, then all of your neighbors would have hated you next year because they would all have it too. But if you learn to recognize the things that are the problems, and the same thing with the insects, that if you learn to recognize the ones that are problematic versus beneficial, then that goes a huge length towards improving the health of your garden.
I guess there are 5 steps in IPM. And then the first one is to identify. So it's really important to identify the insect, identify the pest. And how do you do that? So there is a site that IFAS has called DDIS, which stands for
Distance Diagnostic and Identification System. I had to look that up.
So essentially, it's really used by extension agents. It's used by the help desk. That's another resource, by the way. Back to our episode 1.
Absolutely.
Way back to episode 1 when we had Teresa on, who's our extension agent for Master Gardeners, and talked about all that extension does. So you can come to the help desk, and if you have an insect, and say, what is this? I will tell you that probably 9 times out of 10, we're not going to know.
But you know how to find out, and that's a resource there. And for people that maybe their work schedule or just their physical location makes it difficult to come to the office in Largo, you can send an email, and that email address is in our show notes every week. And you can just message the help desk and say, I've got this going on. Just take a bunch of pictures, be as descriptive as possible.
That's
and
important.
Then we have people that will analyze that, and if we don't get enough information, then we'll write back and say, well, can you tell us some more? And maybe throw in a couple of questions. But then working through it remotely is also an option if you're not able to visit the help desk.
But very much an option. It's something that I've been doing working at the help desk over the last few months. It's been really, really beneficial and interesting, and being able to call people or just send an email back. But this particular site, if we're not sure what it is, we then go to this DDIS site. We are able to put in the image, and it will go to a entomologist at University of Florida to help identify what this is. A lot of resources out there for you. You're not isolated. You're not on your own. You don't have to just Google it or use your phone to try to figure it out.
And even if you do Google something or whatever your preferred web search, if you put the word IFAS with the image search or with the terminology search, that it will tend to pull up the University of Florida IFAS resources that have been scientifically researched and studied, so that they're going to be the most helpful and accurate information available for Florida.
So identifying is a very important step. The next step in IPM is to monitor. So you got to keep an eye on things. That's just part of gardening. It's part of what you're supposed to be doing to see if the problem increases. Because I think there's a misconception, Charlotte, that everybody's going to have a pest-free garden, a pest-free world. Well, no.
If you have a garden with insects, you have no garden, because pollinators are, for the most part, insects. And so even ants can be pollinators, and some of the very small flowers, they're one of the main things that can get inside and carry out that pollination process. But if you are spraying everything to try to get rid of aphids, you might be also getting rid of the lacewings or the butterflies or other things that are helping your garden. So we're not saying don't use a spray or don't use a commercially available treatment. We're saying take a less toxic approach first. And I have a cool example of this with my rosemary plant. And I noticed it earlier in the spring where there was this foam in the leaves of the rosemary, mostly towards the tips of the branches where it was starting to flower. This foam was just so weird, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And it honestly looks like somebody spit on the plant. And I did a little research, and I consulted with our extension agent, Teresa, and she said, well, there's something called a spittle bug, that it creates this protective layer around itself while it's chowing down on your plant, that it's making this foam to protect it from its predators. And so I did a little bit more research on that, and I found that if you can just break down that foam or wash it away, that sometimes the pest will dry up or the beneficial predator will find it more easily, and your problem just goes away. So I stood out there with a water hose for maybe 2 minutes on high and just sprayed all of that foam off of my rosemary bush. And my 3-foot rosemary bush was fine after that. A few weeks later, I noticed a few more spots, spray it down, just on those spots where I see it. And then it's been fine ever since.
So that's a great story that just goes to, I think, what a lot of people will see that, and they run out and grab some
Yeah, I
broad
didn't need to
spectrum
put it.
pesticide
Yeah.
or an oil or something. They would go out and start spraying because they would think that, but just something as physical as that was able to do. But then you were monitoring to see,
Right.
and that's important, right? So that's an important piece of it. So you monitor it, you take care of it, it's done.
Yeah.
So the third step is really to determine the action threshold. So if the pest causes significant problems, then you put your IPM plan into action, which is what you were doing.
Right. And so for me, in that case, water was enough. But in other cases, maybe you might be physically removing a pest that is present in your garden, or maybe encouraging the beneficial predator with creating its habitat or protecting its eggs. Like I've had the green lacewing bug eggs in my garden, and I make sure to protect those so that they hatch because I know that they're going to protect the rest of my plants.
Right. And that's a great thing. So I think another piece of this, you talked about physical and mechanical control. These days, there's biological control. So this is interesting because this is something that I think came about, I would say, in the last 20 to 30 years is a biological control. There's a couple of them, but one of them is BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. And that's specific for the butterfly larva, for the caterpillars.
Well, and there's a couple of varieties of BT as well, which I've kind of learned in studying for this episode. I have cucumbers in my garden. They're finished for the summer, but I would apply BT on those cucumbers because it would deal with the budworms that prevent the fruit from setting. And then I also have several rain barrels on my property. So there's a different kind of BT that is designed to deal with mosquito larvae. And so I'm storing water in a closed rain barrel, but it has to have some access because otherwise how does the rain get in? So I keep a treatment of BT in that rain barrel, and then I'm just cautious about where I use that water later on.
I guess one of the things that I'm curious about with BT is it really is more broad spectrum for the caterpillars.
Yeah, it can harm beneficial caterpillars.
So there's
you
some
want to be
beneficial
careful.
caterpillars. You got to be careful
Right.
about where you're putting it and where you're concentrating it. And
Yeah, and it also comes back to another previous episode, the label is the law. And that was talking about fertilizer last time, but that applies for pesticides as well and herbicides, that you need to be using the right thing in the right place and using it appropriately, using it according to the instructions, and also disposing of it appropriately. And we'll kind of touch on that later, that making sure that you're using it within the appropriate window of time so that it is effective in the way it's meant to be, and that you're not just dumping it into something that would get into our water stream and harm other beneficials.
And if you are using biological control, you really need to have protection.
Yeah.
You really should protect yourself also, which is part of the label.
And I'm so bad about not wearing my gloves or not wearing my facial protection.
I think we all are.
Because you think, oh, I'm just going out for a minute. And then 3 hours later.
Yeah, but you really have to be careful with
Right.
that, and especially with the chemical control. So after we've determined our action, and the next thing is to implement the strategies. So work with a professional if you need to, or determine your own effective strategy, which is what you've been doing to suppress the pest population. We're never going to get rid of them.
Sure. And we don't want to get rid of all insects because most insects are good or neutral. Very few of them are actually harmful. So another thing that you can get into, if the less toxic approaches are not working and you're monitoring and your problem is continuing or increasing, then you do want to take it to not just maybe a BT, but in some applications, you might use a horticultural oil or an insecticidal soap, a botanical treatment, things like neem oil, and all of these are recommended by IFAS as a next step in the process, that it's low impact, a low toxicity approach that will deal with certain pests. And you have to know what pest you're dealing with and know what product you're dealing with and make sure that they match up, because you shouldn't be using something that is a broad spectrum on a plant that is meant to attract a beneficial bug. You want to make sure that you're not killing all the caterpillars on your milkweed, because you're going to be killing your monarch caterpillars. And
Which is what you want.
yeah, you want those. That's why you have the milkweed.
You have the milkweed.
But dealing with maybe, and this is something we've chatted about before, that aphids are a problem on my milkweed. And I've had several different colors of aphids. And I've learned, because aphids produce what's called honeydew, and ants love that. So the ants will actually protect the aphids because they want that honeydew. And so then even if you have all of the beneficial bugs, that the ants are, they call it farming them. And they're making it where it's harder for the predators to get them. And so if you can deal with the ant problem first, then most of the time I don't have to worry about the aphids. I'll spray them off with a water hose and then deal with my ants, and then the problem just goes away. And I keep monitoring, and it'll come and go throughout the season, but using the least impactful. But then if I do need to use something, that I look up what is safe for butterfly caterpillars, but is maybe helping to deal with aphids, and finding the appropriate products and using it according to the label instructions.
That's what's the important piece. It goes back to principle one. If we want to try to avoid the problems as much as we can, then if you have the right plant in the right place and try to keep the plant healthy, that's going to be beneficial to the insects that are there, and it's going to reduce the pest problem that you have. We all get stressed out, and we know what stress does. Plants are a living organism.
Absolutely. And they have stress signs as well.
And they have stress signs. And if you stress your plant out, if you plant something that's supposed to be in partial shade or in shade and it's in full sun, probably going to have a problem with insects.
Even if it needs morning sun and you've got it in afternoon sun, they're different. So having it in the best spot, but honestly, don't look over principles 2 and 3. Watering efficiently and fertilizing appropriately are also helping to reduce the stress on your plant, to make the plant itself stronger and more resistant to pest pressure and diseases. So what's our next step, Alan? If the beneficial stuff doesn't work, the botanical stuff doesn't work, where do we have to go from there?
I hate to say the chemical stuff.
And that's okay if you're using it appropriately. And I would say, maybe not as a last resort, but it kind of is as a last resort, that you try everything to be as gentle as possible on our environment, on your garden, and on the beneficial as well, or in particular. But then at some point, you are going to have to fight that battle at times and say, okay, my tolerance has met its match. And so I'm going to find an appropriate insecticide. I'm going to use it according to the label directions. And I'm going to spot treat just as little as possible. I'll isolate a plant, maybe even remove a plant. I've had cases where an infestation was bad enough that I would dig out a plant and move it away from my pollinator garden so that I could treat the plant, get it healthy again, and then put it back. So whatever you can do to reduce the impact, to minimize the impact on the beneficial things and on your other plants, and still deal with your pest when you have to.
And it all goes back to, we've said this in many episodes, research. Just take a little bit of time and energy, and there's lots and lots of resources, as we've pointed out at the beginning of this episode, and as we pointed out throughout all of our other episodes. You have the extension service, you have the help desk. As you said, in doing any kind of search, put in IFAS at the end, and that will give you the best kind of information. And when it comes to chemical pesticides, as you said, look at the label, look at what the label's going to tell you, what insects this impacts. And as long as you've done that first step in identifying the insect, that's going to be helpful.
Yeah, you don't want a broad spectrum insecticide when you're dealing with 1 or 2 pests. You want something that's going to deal with that 1 or 2 pests and not harm everything else.
But especially in our community, which is so urbanized, when you start spraying a broad spectrum pesticide or even just one that's more focused, but again, you're not spot treating it, the potential of that running off into our stormwater and into our lakes and into our bay.
And if we're really going to get technical here, even a spot treated plant, the next time that it rains, that is going to impact the groundwater. The insecticide that's on that plant, even if it's a botanical or horticultural product, that it is impacting the groundwater. So we're just trying to minimize that impact as much as possible. And I want to throw in one other little tip here that I found interesting, that whenever you're dealing with a soap, an oil, a pesticide, those can injure your plants as well. And so the more stressed that the plant becomes, the more susceptible it is to the pest pressure. Just simply applying the pesticide in the cooler parts of the day. And we have to be careful in Florida because of our humidity that we don't necessarily want to put anything wet on the leaves of a plant in the evening. If it rains, we can't avoid that, but to purposefully put something that's going to stay wet overnight will tend to encourage fungus and bacteria growth as well. And that's kind of another layer in our pest management, is dealing with these even smaller things than the bugs that we see, fungus, bacteria, mold, even the nematodes under the surface of the ground, that all of those things are, again, impacting our plants. But just because a plant has damage doesn't necessarily mean it has to be treated. We're looking at what are we willing to accept? What are we willing to tolerate? I'm thrilled if my milkweed is all chewed up because I know that it's supporting monarchs and that's what it's there for. Same thing with my privet cassia, that it's there for the sulfur butterflies. And those things are good. But if I just treat every bug, then I'm not going to have those beneficial bugs or insects or the good things. So applying those products in the cooler part of the day, it helps reduce the damage to the plant. And then also, usually early in the morning, the wind is more calm. So the overspray is going to be less of an issue if you're spraying in the early morning, where that spot treatment stays in that spot, because they have documented that drift of products like this can go way beyond what we originally thought that they might. And so there's buffer zones and things that agricultural people do, but just being mindful of that in your home garden, that you are applying things not only according to the label directions, but at the right time of day and at the right rates and all of those things.
So, yeah, I was going to get to the rates of that because that's important, because a lot of times you will just keep spraying and not realize, oh, wow, I sprayed too much. Mm-hmm. So if we could kind of summarize all of this, I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is again, for people to not kind of just go right out. I see a pest and grab.
We don't want to overreact.
And yeah, that's where I was going. Where they overreact and they have to kill. And I see that at the help desk. I see people coming in and they're like,
well, I know that there's people that walk in, hand over a sample and say, what should I spray on this plant? Okay, water? I don't know.
What is the insect?
Yeah, what is the plant? What is the insect? What is the problem? Is there a bacterial issue going on at the same time? Why are we?
But we will also ask how much
this?
water, how much are you watering? Has it been fertilized? So we go back to these.
Has it been over-fertilized?
Has it been over-fertilized? Has it been overwatered? Because that presents stress issues too. And so just by reducing how much water, well, except for the rainy season, but we can't help that. But by reducing the water.
But we can turn off our irrigation during the rainy season.
If we can do some of that, that may actually prevent some of these other issues that we see that come in. So I think in the long run, it's again research.
Yeah.
Research what you're doing. You're never going to have a pest-free yard. That is just ridiculous to even think that you will, nor should you want to. And if you do have the pest, we need to think about this integrated pest management. So an integrated way of dealing with the pest, whether that's just doing a physical or a mechanical kind of control where you literally just take off the leaves that you see the pest on.
Well, and kind of going back to something I mentioned earlier, that unwanted plants can be considered a pest in your garden. We call those weeds. And so physically pulling out a weed is not foreign to us, but physically pulling out a bug, oh, I don't want to touch it. Okay, put on your gloves or get a broom and dustpan or, something, even a shop vac. You can get if you know that the pest is a problem and you don't want to put your hands on it, then find a way to control it in the least toxic, the least impactful way possible.
And then monitoring it.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, again, just to remember that you have to monitor it because they're not going to go away.
Yeah.
And they're going to come back. And if you monitor it and you keep using these principles.
And if you see a beneficial predator bug in the same area and you know that the pest that you're dealing with is something that predator will feed on, then just watch and see if it's doing its job before you spray anything. And then if it's not keeping up, then help it out.
Yeah. And so by doing all of that, you can deal with our principle 6, which is managing your pests responsibly and in a way in which it's not going to impact the environment or our ecosystem in a major way.
And definitely there's so much more we could have gotten into with companion planting and other applications of nutrients and things that will help microbial things. And, there's so much to this.
It goes back to right plant, right place, and keep them healthy.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
all of the other things that you mentioned, that's how you keep your plant healthy.
Yeah, and honestly, that leads perfectly into our wrap up, which is the Ready, Set, Grow. And the maintenance things that we need to do getting ready. First one on the list for September is monitor your lawn and your garden for signs of insect damage. The fall armyworms, the chinch bugs, the mole crickets, the sod webworms. A lot of things are active at this time of year. And if you're monitoring and dealing with it in a low impact way as quickly as possible, then you're getting your garden ready to be successful in our go time with the cooler months coming.
And if you're not sure what you have, bring it to the help desk. Or again, if you can't make it to the help desk in Largo, you can go ahead and take pictures of it, but take a lot of pictures. There's an email address you can send that to, and we will answer that.
And there are other pop-ups of the help desk, like at Folly Farm and some other places in the county. So, just check out the
Boyd Hill.
Yeah. So check out the IFAS website, the extension office, and you'll see the dates for all of those of when they're coming up. Another thing that we need to do to get ready for our gardening season is being mindful of the irrigation ordinances and the fertilizer ordinances and making sure that you are complying with those things. We had record-setting rainfall recently and I was driving through so many places where commercial and residential sprinklers were running, and it had been raining for 3 days straight.
There's no need for that.
There's no need for that, and it's causing more problems than you realize. So make sure that your system is running properly, that you don't have any leaks.
And now the last piece of maintenance goes right back to our episode, which is remove dead and diseased plants, because that puts pest pressure. If you have some plants that are not doing well, take them out, because again, it's going to have an impact on the other plants that are there, and it can cause pest problems, which is what we're trying to avoid.
And even if you are only removing it temporarily and bringing it into an isolated space to treat it and kind of rehabilitate the plant and then be able to put it back later if it bounces back, then that's fine. But just understanding that if you leave that in your regular gardening space, that those pests are going to continue to spread to your other plants in your garden.
So what can we do to set ourselves and get prepped for the season? Because it's coming.
So a healthy garden needs healthy soil. So one of the biggest things, and we've been talking about solarizing the soil the last few months in the heat. It's getting to the point where we're going to start to cool off. I won't say that we're cooling off yet, but we're hopeful that it's almost here. At this point, you want to be checking your soil and maybe test the pH so that you can adjust it if plants have specific pH needs, depending on what variety of plants you have, that you may want to increase or decrease the pH in some ways, or maybe move a plant that needs a different pH to a spot of your yard that it matches the conditions. And then also your nutrients that you can test that. There's a soil test that you can get through IFAS
That's what I was going to mention.
some home options, but just making sure that you know exactly what you're using so that when our fertilizer ban ends at the end of September, that you know if you need something and what you need and where to put it for the plants that you want to grow. So the last thing that we can do to get set or preparing for the season is if you have a perennial that tends to spread or build up a little clump, even some of the grasses and things that might be ornamental plants, that this is a good time to divide those. And don't be shy about it. Honestly, just get you a nice sharp shovel and jam it right down in there and pull out the chunk that you want to move it somewhere else or share it with a friend. And making sure that your plants aren't getting overcrowded is another way that you're helping with IPM, that the plants are able to be more healthy in that space, that there's airflow, there's all the things that they need. They're not competing for the resources to stay strong and healthy. And then we want to grow. What are we going to grow at this time of year?
Well, wax begonias, milkweed, pentas, zinnias, tropical sage, some moss. Those marigolds are a good time still this time of year.
Yeah, even cosmos and gaillardia. There's a lot of flowers that will bloom from the late summer through the fall. And some of them that, like the cooler season, that you can get them started from seed now, and then they'll continue to grow as our weather does cool off. And then some herbs as well. Coriander, also known as cilantro, that tends to bolt very quickly in our climate. But if you're growing it for the seed, then you want it to bolt. You want it to set the seed. So if you think about it as, I'll get the leaves if I can, but I'm really going for the seed, then you're not going to be as disappointed when it bolts. Parsley, chives, thyme, and fennel. There's a lot of herbs that are good to either start from small plants or from seeds in the fall and the late summer.
And then finally start veggie seeds. So
Absolutely.
This is the time to have our warm season seeds.
The ones that have a shorter growing season,
Right.
you can still plant those. And things that are more the cool season plants, but they take longer, go ahead and get those started. So some of your brassicas, you might be able to start plants, peppers, even tomatoes, some of the different kinds of spinach or squash, the things that will grow in our cooling down season into the cool season. Sweet potatoes, beans, okra, there is just so much. Florida is just a prime space for agricultural and just veggie gardening. And there's so many things that this is really our prime time coming into the season where it's not so hot that everything struggles, that we can actually enjoy the more moderate temperatures and still having some good rainfall and getting that harvest before the winter actually hits us for a few weeks.
And as usual, please leave comments. Please subscribe or like our podcast. We love to hear from you all, and we really enjoy doing this podcast for you all.
It's been fun, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Planting Pinellas. We hope you're feeling inspired to get involved, learn more, and grow alongside this incredible community.
Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you like the show, leave us 5 stars or a review. And don't forget to share with fellow plant lovers. Until next time, keep planting, keep growing, and keep making Pinellas County a place to thrive.
This podcast is brought to you by the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension in Pinellas County, Florida, an equal opportunity institution.